Pax 8, we're a cloud distributor. We're born in the cloud, and we focus very heavily on Microsoft, AWS, as well as a bunch of other suite of security products that are instantly provisioned, API capable. When you think about it, we're seeing a shift, in my opinion, from a very infrastructural view of the world from a security perspective. I'll protect that computer because it goes beep boop, and I'll be able to use this EDR because it's the best, and I can, but all of that is broken. Because if I actually compromise you, or I compromise your identity, or your identity in some other way has been compromised, I'm going to win anyway. It's all about the data. It's all about the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that. And when you start leaning into that in the confidentiality side, is that Hendrik or not? Is that Matt or not? And so you get into this understanding that identity is at the very, very center of that. Identity is the very core and element of what we are. That hasn't changed over the history of life. It simply is drawn further and faster into the technology world. And I don't think we, as an overall globe of cybersecurity or technologists, were prepared for that. When you think about it, there's thousands of my identities out there. I can use my Facebook or my RBC bank to log into this, but that's one copy of me. And hopefully it's me. And if it's my finances, I really hope it's me. But there's all these other copies that get created, and there isn't one source of true identity. And I think that's what's interesting about what we're seeing play out in our world is identity is getting to be understood that it's a problem. It is taking advantage of cryptographic or other systemic methodologies of proof of identity. And you're starting to see it become more and more decentralized, where in the past you might have my Matt Lee at Microsoft account, and I work at Microsoft, and that's what I do, and I have my account there. But that's not backed by anything. It's only backed by that HR company saying that I am me and that I should have had access to this, and I'm probably the bloke that has access to it, right? But it's not tied back to some other core identity of me. I happened to be at an engineering airlift in Seattle, and I met with them there, and we were talking about distributed identity. And so I leaned in, we spent a day and a half talking about it. Ultimately, it just kind of fit into a place that I thought was that gap I just described, right? That there's this aspect of my identity, a personal wallet of my stuff that could maybe just be assertions, not handing over documents, not giving out privacy. And what stood out to me was they were doing some really neat extensibility with DID Web and DID Ion with Microsoft's own Intra collaboration. And so as Microsoft acquired Intra, it's that extensibility of that verified identity that then ties back into the Microsoft and Intra platform. I think that they've got an opportunity. Take a look at what's happening when it comes to Clear, for example, in the US and what they're doing now. So I think the market is starting to understand the value of this and starting to understand that. But for me, it's probably the privacy side of things, in the sense that, let's say I was an issuer of credentials and those credentials were then in someone's wallet. They could be asserted to, but they don't necessarily have to be shared. I don't necessarily have to have your driver's license to know that you have a valid one. I don't necessarily have to store your date of birth to know that it was actually valid. I don't actually have to know, and I'm being a little hyperbolous, but when you start thinking about that, I think the future for a Credivera or things that are playing in that DID space is going to be dependent on getting more and more issuers, continuing to understand the value of that issuance and the ability to meet privacy through that issuance, the ability to meet ephemerality of a credential with that kind of capability. If that plays out, then a Credivera becomes the glue that builds that all together. The wallet, the portability of it, the tech behind it that applies the DID that then comes into that space for all of these players. I can say if we ever get to a point where Hendrik is carrying a wallet that says Credivera, that he now has the ability to hand stuff to people in a secure way, prove that it was actually documented correctly, all the way back to the root and the source and the origin of those things in one tiny little package, then you start getting into this understanding of tying the human level to elements outside from a cyber perspective. So you could see large movements in how do we solve cybercrime? How do we solve a lot of things? And granted, I'm being a little conjectured, and the nice thing about being the 3-year vision guy is nobody calls you an idiot for like 2.25 years, give or take, right? So I've got a built-in win with these theories, but I think the win is in commercialization of an identity of one. Identity is changing. And even the concept of identity, it's changing drastically. And I think to your point of digitization and even what used to be a paper card that you wrote on and some bloke at the spot said, yeah, that's me. And technology and ownership of identity are also quite changing. Stay ahead of that curve and learn about distributed identities and decentralized things that are starting to play out in that regard.